Kathleen, away you go.
Tar ceann mór in óglacht a chuirde, céad míle fáilte ró the nocht, is tásúla gom go muinnig siomh taitneamh as an oíche. You're all very welcome, and I hope you enjoyed the evening. I'm Kathleen Ellis Cleary. I'm a relative of Sean Tracy. He participated and helped to plan the barrack attacks of Hollyford, Drangan and Rearcross. Tonight is very special for me and for many others. We remember the men and women of Tipperary Brigades and their fight against oppression. In 1920, the IRA brought the fight for freedom to the very doors of the RIC in a bid to remove British rule from rural Ireland. Commemoration in Óglacht had planned a weekend commemoration, but as we all know, fate intervened in the form of a global pandemic, and lockdown has prevented us from meeting up in person this weekend. However, one lesson we can learn from the men and women involved in the barrack attack is how to use current technology and circumstances to our advantage. Thanks to Tras and Etirna, we can come into your homes and you can come into ours, and we can, as generations did before, sit around the fireside and talk of and listen to tales and daring acts and patriotism. How remarkable that is, in essence, that we've revived an old Irish tradition of neighbours gathering in this modern way. I know tonight we have in our company children, relatives and friends of the volunteers from home and abroad who may not have been able to travel to Hollyford, Drangan or Rearcross and be with us. This is something very special, and I thank each and every one of you for being here tonight to remember in the only way we can at the moment these events of 100 years ago. We're really the first commemoration of this kind to take place, and so I can't resist quoting Thomas Davis, where Tipperary leads, the rest of Ireland follows. It was true in 1919, 101 years ago, and later we can claim it now again. There are many more people here tonight who are much better at telling the stories of our heroes, and I won't take up much of your time. I just give you a brief rundown of the programme. The evening will be facilitated by honorary Tipperary man Marcus Howard of Easter Rising Stories. Marcus has made many wonderful documentaries, including some excellent documentaries on Tipperary and its part in the fight for independence. He has shown a dedication of telling the stories of our nation's struggle for freedom. In his documentary of 1920, The Burning of the Barracks, Marcus skillfully interweaved modern reenactment, his own storytelling, modern interviews, and video footage of the 1980s interviews done by John Hassett, Pat O'Donnell, and Raymond Shanahan. That product is a touching and wonderful testament to what we are celebrating here tonight. When we got the idea of the online commemoration, we originally thought to screen this film, but it grew too large and into something much bigger. And so instead we have Cormac O'Malley, Derek Warfield, Liz Gillis, Derek Monaghan, Lima Donahue, Robert O'Keefe, Mike Power, Shannon Morrissey, Michael Maroney, Stephen Ryan, and Dan Jack. And they're all here to tell us the story in different ways of the events of 100 years ago. Marcus will be introducing them all in a more detailed, but I really want to thank them all for their time, enthusiasm, and wonderful support for this evening. We have a talk by Cormac, followed by music from Derek Warfield and the Young Wolf Tones. Then part one of our panel discussion with Liz, Derek, Monaghan, and Liam. After that, a poetic interlude with Drangan Bard, Mike Power. The great Tipperary tradition of the local poet is alive and well. Shannon Morrissey will sing her granduncle's song, The Barracks of Ray, which describes the Rearcross barrack attack. After that, we will have the second part of our panel discussion with Michael Maroney, Stephen Ryan, and Dan Jack. This will be followed by question and answer session. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat box with the name of the preferred historian, and we will try and answer some of them at the end. Niamh Hassett will wind up the evening. We have some wonderful people participating tonight, and we're all hoping that it goes okay. Please bear with us if there's any glitches. This is a world first here, and we will do our best to have the evening go smooth. So, Carter, thank you so much for being part of this occasion. Your support and encouragement has brought tonight about, and we are overjoyed at the level of interest at international, national, and local level. Most of all, we're here to honour those remarkable men and women of 100 years ago, and I hope we can do some justice to their memories. I hope you enjoyed the evening. Marcus, now it's over to you.
Thanks very much, Kathleen. Very well said. So my name is Marcus Howard. I love being a part of this history group, Trasna Natira, and what they're trying to do. I always say this: we're not going to let a virus stop us from commemorating our most important year of the War of Independence. We're focusing on what we can do, not what we can't do. You may think the revolution will not be televised. Well, it may not be televised, but it's going to be on Zoom and it's going to be on YouTube. What I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you to Cormac O'Malley. Now, Cormac O'Malley is the son of Ernie O'Malley, and Cormac is an excellent historian himself. Ernie is the Irish author of his autobiographical memoirs, On Another Man's Wound and the Singing Flame. He's a military historian and a militant nationalist from the 1916 to 1924 period. Cormac's mother was Helen Hooker from Connecticut. Cormac was born in Ireland, but went to the USA at age 14 to live with his mother after his father died in 1957. Now, over the last 30 years, Cormac has helped preserve his father's literary and historical image by republishing his earlier works, including the well-known books and newly discovered manuscripts. He's co-edited 2 volumes of his father's letters from 1922 to 1957. And in recent years, he's published a multi-volume series of his father's military interviews with survivors of the War of Independence and Civil War, entitled The Men Will Talk to Me, the Ernie O'Malley Interviews. These now include counties featured such as Kerry, Galway, Mayo, West Cork, Clare, and the Northern Divisions. His 2015 book, Western Ways, was a book of photographs by his parents on Mayo in the 1930s. And in 2016, he edited Modern Ireland and the Revolution, Ernie O'Malley in Context. Cormac now lives in Stonington, Con. And I just want to say, if it wasn't both for Ernie O'Malley's participation in Ireland's revolutionary years, but also having the foresight to record the interviews with the men who actually took part, our knowledge of our history would be far poorer as a result. So over to you, Cormac O'Malley, and thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm honored as the son of Ernie to be present. I should say on what's going to happen, I'm really not an expert historian, and I look forward to hearing from the local people who have far more intimate knowledge of through their family and the lore which had gone on after the attacks on Hollyford, Drangan and Rearcross. Marcus referred to my father's story On Another Man's Wound. But you know, that was written in Taos, New Mexico, and in California and New York, a long way from Tipperary. And it's always amazing as to what memories he had and how he was able to incorporate some of those details. But in fact, there are far more local details, and with the Bureau of Military Statement and friends and relatives that you all have, you will have far more local history. So what I'm really trying to do in sort of giving a set off to the seminar here is to make sure we have sort of the ground rules. And it's not only for us, if I may say, but it's for other people who are going to listen who may not, with their YouTube experience, have a background of what it is that we are actually talking about today. So I wanted to set where the IRA was, where the Irish military was in their war against Britain in 1920 and how it was organized. There was a general headquarters in Dublin, and that was sort of like the Pentagon of Ireland. In fact, it was a very small Pentagon, and there were 65 brigades. Now, the irony is that these 65 brigades acted totally independently. So that was certainly the view of Dublin. On the other hand, it was because that they were independent that they were able to do their own actions. And within each brigade, I should say that there were 32 counties. Most counties had at least one brigade. For example, Kilkenny was a sole brigade, but Tipperary had 3, Mayo had 4. There were others variations in numbers. And within a brigade structure, there were battalions, quite often up to 9 battalions. If you had enough to have 9 battalions, you got a sort of another brigade, and you broke them into 2 brigades. Each brigade had its own headquarters, and it had its staff, so that you had a commandant, a vice commandant, director of intelligence, director of supplies, and all the other levels of administration. Under each brigade, then there was these 9 battalions, and those 9 battalions similarly had their own headquarters with somewhat less staff. And under each battalion, you could have up to 9 counties. So in fact, you had what you call a pyramid within each brigade area of, let's take the simple math, which would be if you had 91 companies and 9 battalions and 1 brigade, you can see how that structure goes. And let's put a number of 10 to 15. Let's take a simple number, 10 in each company. You suddenly have a large 900, my math isn't very good, 800-man brigade. I'm not saying they were all that large or that small, but that's the way the system worked. We're not going to be talking about today, at least in my overview, but I just want to mention that divisions, the 65 battalions wasn't very good organization. And a couple of months later, in late 1920, the GHQ thought up the idea of having divisions. So we get within the Tipperary, Cork area, there was the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Southern Division. And there was a Western Division, a Northern Division, and an Eastern Division. But that's next year's history, and we'll have another seminar on that. Also, we're not talking about today the flying columns, but flying columns are very famous in Irish IRA guerrilla tactics, because they were the men who were able to be totally independent from the home and joined a flying column and had particular operations. So I'm going to give another element of history today in terms of how were these things organized. There was a local brigade, but quite often the brigades got some assistance from a GHQ, and these came in the form of an organizer. People like Ernie O'Malley and others were sent around to the different brigades to help them organize. Now, what was needed in an organization, and what is it that someone could do? Quite often, as we all know in our own organizations, it's quite helpful to have an outsider come in and sort of tell you what to do, or at least give you some instruction, because you might not have thought of the alphabet soup from A to Z all by yourself, and somebody else who's had experience can bring that in. In the first instance, the organizers would help, and Father's first assignment was to help elect local brigades. The IRA was a volunteer group based on a democracy, so you elected a company, elected its leader. The several companies got together and they elected their battalion leader. The several battalion leaders and some of the company people got together and they elected their brigade leader. And so this was the structure in which it was. It was not always based upon the heroics or the potential achievement of the individual, A lot of local politics going on into how these elections did. Anyway, so people needed help as to mechanically how to get that done, and the organizers helped. Another thing they needed to do is help instruct the volunteers in terms of how to, many of them had not shot a rifle, many of them didn't have rifles, but if they had a rifle, they would be passed around at a shooting match, so to speak, so that they could figure out when they got a rifle, what they would do with it. Not only getting a rifle and shooting, you need to know how to clean it, repair it, and maintain it. Handling of ammunition, loading ammunition in as rapid a manner, making grenades or handling grenades, making sure you know how to pull that little tip up and throw it correctly. These were mechanical things that people needed to get trained on. Reading of maps. So, you know, the intelligence people and the other people needed to make sure that the local commanders knew how to read the maps and indeed have a map. And one of the things that Ernie was insisted on was to have a map made by each local battalion, brigade, and company commander, so that they would be able to share with their people what specifically the territory was within each area. And that was an important element because turf, as we all know, is an important word not only in Irish history, but in local command. Whose turf is this? Who is going to make the decision? How is cooperation going to be occurred? So that was an element. Another simple thing would be telling people about the consciousness of intelligence and how to collect intelligence, how to pass it along through the intelligence officer. You know, so-and-so was seen talking to the guards. The guards got such and such a delivery from the post office. All of this information was fed back in, and though each element of it didn't seem particularly important, by having a capacity to analyze this, and you needed to train people to do that. Preparing people for dumps, for communication so that they wouldn't be captured. Building dugouts as necessary. Learning how to snipe at enemy. Anyway, these were all things that needed to have training. Now, I was talking principally about the volunteers there. Officers in the same capacity needed exactly the same training. They didn't, according to my father, I didn't always want to be seen as if they didn't know these things, but my father certainly records well and frequently that they did not. And another thing that they wanted to try to do is to make sure that their local leaders and they as individuals try to help people, inspire them, the local volunteers, to take action. So whether this be out strutting and walking, remember there was an incident in the north where Father had the local company march down the center of the town. And afterward, there was Father O'Donnell told me the story many years ago. He got the story from the local commander, and he said, and Father was asked why he was doing this. He said, well, it's good for the men's morale. And the commander sort of said, well, it sure wasn't good for mine. Because by walking down the center of a road, everyone knew that that local man was the commander, was in a position of power. Now, what was important was to tell the people that there had local people, the IRA, who could take a charge and be in power. And even if the RIC were around that day, for most part, they retired. And there was a silent acceptance that the IRA could do their things, but as long as they didn't shoot anyone. But showing power was significant. But anyway, I thought that was an amusing story. Another element was how the local organizer was perceived by the local people. I mean, here's a guy, and in my father's case, a relatively young man. When he started in 1918, he was 21. And he was coming to tell older people, usually, what to do. Now, there's another expression for someone like that. Not only is he from Dublin and a GHQ man, but he's a greenhorn, and he is somebody who has learned what he's talking about from books. Now, it's not as if the people down the country knew much different, but certainly there was a different attitude, and there was not always a keen reception given to organizers who came in to tell people what to do, how to march, how to train. So there was, I would say, an ambivalent reaction back and forth. But for the most part, it was a healthy one, and people did learn. One of the things about the organizers, they would come and go in the sense that father would stay in Tipperary or whatever he was given a particular assignment for 3 or 4 weeks, and then they moved on. But it was hopeful that for the 3 or 4 weeks that was enough to get that local group going. Father does record that he, as he went around, he was quite, on several occasions, he was asked to leave. Interesting. Why? Well, when Ernie O'Malley came into a local house of a farmer, let's say, he was a real threat. If he was caught by the RIC that night, the house could be burned, the children could be arrested or whatever. If an RIC man came in, Father always told the story that he was a greater threat than the RIC, because if the RIC came into the home, they would ask some questions, and perhaps if someone needed to be taken off for further questioning, they would, but the chances are nothing significant. If the Ernie O'Malley came in, or another organizer, that family was likely to lose their children in a certain sense. Namely, their lives would be changed forever. If they became revolutionaries, if they went on the run, if they made that commitment as Ernie and the other people had done, that house would change. And of course, the mother and father who were doing their other responsibilities, not only for the other children, about running the farm or whatever it was that they were doing, that was of great concern to them. Thank God, most of them signed up and they accepted him. But it was one of the other tensions which was in the life. Now, let me just give you some background to the man who comes to Tipperary and to Hollyford. Ernie O'Malley is an organizer. He's left his home in age 21 in Tipperary, in Dublin, goes to work for Michael Collins and Richard Mulcahy in March 1918. And what he does is, by the time he gets to Tipperary, he has been through Tyrone to Offaly to Laois and Westmeath, Longford. So in all of these circumstances, he's building up more rapport, experience, figuring out how best to get along with people. I should say that Ernie O'Malley, I don't know what the local stories are, and I look forward to hearing them, was not a particularly friendly person. He was an intellectual. He throughout his life, and not only then, he wasn't a good drinker, and of course the organizers had given up drink. He wasn't a local farmer. He didn't know the country people as such. He came from a university background in Dublin. His brothers had gone off to the British Army, and so he wasn't what you call a local palsy person. He couldn't clap you on the back and sort of say, "How are you?" He was, and in fact, I was thinking how restrained he was in his activities, how isolated he was. And since he went into isolation, here's a man who was changing home every 3 weeks. And of course, that has an isolating effect upon a leader. So anyway, that's just to come back in the background. So he was in Roscommon where he was shot at and a warrant was taken out on him. He injured his left hand. Went on to North Roscommon. Sent to London by Michael Collins to do some activities over there. Came back. Went on to East and West Donegal, back to Tyrone, down to Midwest and East Clare, and did a stage, a period up in North Tipperary in late 1919. Then went back to Donegal, was in an arms raid up there, did North Dublin with Finglas, was involved in Monaghan in 1920. So as this, by 1920, when he gets to Tipperary. He is now still not 22, and he's giving orders and trying to influence people. So he learns a lot. I think history will record, and certainly he does record, that one of his favorite groups of people in the country, after looking back on all things, was his Tipperary men. And he was delighted when, at the end of his being captured, etc., tortured, escaping from Kilmainham, that Column sent him back to the Tipperary, to the officer in command of the 2nd Southern Division, which included 2 brigades in Tipperary and 1 in Kilkenny and East Limerick. Now, another thing, so we're talking about 1920, how things were organized, and let's talk about a little bit about what was changing within the IRA operations. I mean, we had a big start in Solohead Beg, you know, as Marcus said, Tipperary leads and others follow, right? So Solohead Beg was indeed a leading shot fired around the world. It wasn't always, as Tipperary people will know, not particularly regarded in high regard by headquarters. And so that's one of the reasons that they didn't want individuals or groups of people taking action, is they wanted actions to be coordinated. And though thus they wanted, you know, selection of, let's say, what barracks was going to be attacked in a selected manner, rather than having a lot of it that barracks be attacked. So I just want to go back into what was happening then on the ground in Tipperary and elsewhere in early 1920. So coming out of the elections of 1918, there was the Irish Parliamentary Party had been defrocked in a certain sense, and Sinn Féin won 77 out of 107 positions in the Irish Parliament. So that represented all of these counties and brigade areas around. And because of the confidence in the Sinn Féin, you could see that there was a change in spirit and attitude in partially there was, you know, we think of the how we all honor 1916. 1916 was not well honored early on. And indeed, it was partially, if you think of how it occurred, it wasn't a democratic action. It wasn't like what happened with the Sinn Féin development of 1918. Sinn Féin actually represented what the people wanted. And so they were willing to go to that flow. And after the war ended, people just said, yeah, I'm going to be an Irishman. I want to join in Sinn Féin. I want to join with IRA. So the IRA started getting flooded with a lot more people than it had at the earlier period. That's very timely, because we were building up to the idea of what the original dream was, to have an army and to take on the British. So new tactics needed to be developed. Of course, they needed to have arms. The old way to get arms was raid the local landlord and get the shotgun or the odd rifle. Try to buy them from Dublin, collect your money and send the money to Dublin. Dublin didn't have enough guns in order to send guns down to the local people. So there were other ways to develop, and that's the whole concept of why raiding the RIC barracks developed, because those were strongholds of grenades, barracks, pistols, etc. Quite apart from the armament side, they also took care of a lot of the RIC barracks had been abandoned by the RIC, not because of the IRA threat as such, but well, it was because of the IRA threat, but not because of an attack. And so in April 1920, in a coordinated manner around the country, there were several tactics going on. On the 4th of April, the abandoned barracks were all burned in fire. So that was sending a smoke signal, so to speak, to the local people that we're ready to take over. We're going to show you what we can do. On April 5th, in many towns, the IRA burned the local tax offices. Now, when you burn a tax office, that is a really very important little element in the local community. It's like, and the next year they start setting up their own court system. So these are symbols of power and showing that we, the people, are in charge. So, and also in April of that year, they set up an announcement that they would start shooting spies. So the word is out that the IRA is active and ready to go. Anyway, I think I passed my time, so let's ask for questions.
It was fascinating, Cormac. I could let you go on all night, but just we have other historians too. Ernie, I just want to ask you one question, if possible. Ernie O'Malley was such an action man, but yet I kind of don't understand how he became so organized so quickly, because he wasn't really organized before 1916, but then he progresses so quickly up the ranks. How was that?
Well, I think he was a medical student. And so, and he had flunked his final exams at high school, so to speak, and yet got a scholarship into UCD. So clearly he had a mind that had the capacity. I don't know how anyone can study medicine and get all those Latin terms and whatever, but it takes an organized mind to do it. And so, and it takes a capacity to write notes in class and remember them. So it was that sort of training, I think, that, and apart from that, I mean, the Malley brothers all were quite smart. All three of his brothers later in life earned the first medal in University College Dublin in medicine. And even though many people consider that a Free State institution at the time, well, it was. And two of my uncles couldn't get jobs in Ireland because they couldn't speak Irish. They didn't deny them the first place exam. So I think you were dealing with a family of bright children. And, just like Michael Collins, he was an organizer and an administrator. He was able to do those things, and a very quiet person. So he sat back. He didn't want to go to the pub and drink. He wanted to get his memos out. So he had that quiet tenacity. And if you see all of his files in UCD and the National Library, you can see detail after detail of notes of what he did. So that was how he was able to do it, with the pen.
Well, Cormac, from all of us here at Drangan and Rearcross, we really, really are so grateful that you came to do this tonight. It was a pleasure and honor to have you here. And it's great to see you keep the flame alive for Ernie's memory and also for Tipperary and all the other counties as well that you helped serve in, So thank you so much.
Sorry, I went over time.
No, not at all. So that was round one, everybody. So we're up for another round now with another heavy hitter. We have Derek Warfield coming up next. Now, Derek Warfield I've also interviewed before, and he's a man who's really helped keep our history alive throughout the generations. He has shown that, it's music that is written that helps keep the history alive, maybe after the 1798 rebellion. The victors will write the books, but the people who will write the music will keep the history alive. It's a pleasure and honor to introduce you to Derek Warfield of the Young Wolf Tones, who'll give an introduction before we'll play a very famous song, a song that you all know from this year. So Derek, over to you. How's it going?
Thank you very much, Marcus, and thanks very much indeed for inviting me to be part of this commemoration. I'm very honored that to be part of it. I think I'll start by reminding many of the viewers that songs and music have played a crucial role in Ireland's resistance and protest down through the years. And I think we always undervalue the things that are probably have done most to preserve our heritage and our self-respect, because I think in the oldest texts of Irish history, you'll find references to music. So music, essentially, it was an ingredient that in any book that was written was always quoted or being part of the celebration or commemoration. I don't think there's any other country in the world that has its history his social life bound up in music. And it's not just, it went across all social strata in society. It encompassed every aspect of life, and it recorded every event of the history and every issue that affected the community. It was our music, indeed, and the way we expressed it down through the years changed, of course, down to the centuries, with language and with the change from Gaelic to English. But the remarkable thing was that it was able to retain, indeed, its essential ingredients of the power of poetry, the power of very beautiful tunes, and a very strong recording of events that were part of the lifetime of the bards or the musicians of the time. So when we speak of our songs of resistance, like the one I'm going to sing very shortly, you know, over my lifetime of 55 years, I've always thought it very important to remember these simple songs that were written by people as a means of protest or resistance during our periods of oppression. And it was important for me to record them because many of them were written in a spontaneous fashion by people that probably some had greater skills than others. Some had poetic skills, some were able to write fast, but they were spontaneous, and they gave us a picture, a living picture of the event, an issue that affected the particular area. Now, our song lore is national. It goes all over this country, but it's expressed in a very, very different way in most communities. So it's national in its heritage, but it's also local, because the local flavor, in many ways, I always say, it's as different as the accents of the people. If you go around Ireland, you see all different accents, but you'd also see it through music in different parts of our country. And but a great thing I think about our musical history of song and is that it gives us a sense of worth. And I've always said that it was one of the reasons why we were never conquered, our music. And I suppose to speak about the Black and Tans and speak about the 1920s, I think we always have to remember that the reaction of the authorities in England to the Irish aspirations in the 1918 election was so violent and barbaric, and it was almost beyond belief. I don't think there's any other nation that suffered a continuous program of prevention of an aspirational ideal of a people. Not only, indeed, were the papers suppressed, but the news that went across the world was suppressed. And it's interesting to listen to the man speaking before me about America. If you read the papers in 1919 or 1920 in America, you would think that the people that he's talked about were mindless fools and murderers. But the direct opposite was they were very thoughtful people that wanted a better society for their people and had looked upon the 19th century of horrors that were inflicted on this nation by a government that just didn't care. And they were patriotic beyond belief, and they were motivated by the highest unselfish patriotic standards. So the songs, the music are our monuments. There are monuments to the ordinary people's resistance, that they had no other means to give expression to their feelings. The songs became the vehicle through which they protested. And they, in many ways, because we couldn't, the ordinary Irish people, seeing in the men like Ernie O'Malley that went out to fight. They seen in him, his actions, something they would love to do themselves. And their support, indeed, I think people recognized that in a slow sort of a way, over the years of 1970 and with the death of Thomas Ashe, with the response of the British government, particularly towards Ireland, with the 1918 election, they realized that those men who had gone into the GPO and formed the revolution in Dublin were indeed, they represented their thoughts suddenly. The ideas came together in a, if you like, in a collage of freedom. But the songs indeed played a vital part. And last night we did a show on Zoom, and I talked about Padder Carney, who fought in 1960 and wrote the soldier song, or national anthem. He wrote the Tricolored Ribbon, wrote all of the songs that were sung in the GPO were all Irish ballads and songs that the volunteers loved. And so I think in many ways our songs and our music have preserved much of our history, because over the years it was, we didn't have an academic institution that preserved and propagated any of our pastimes or any of our arts or crafts. And it was left to ordinary people to do that. And luckily, we found people in every generation that took up the challenge and preserved the music that we have today.
And Derek, what song will we be performing tonight?
I'm going to sing "Get Out Your Black and Tans." And, you know, this song is an old tune, based on an old tune from the Munster War song, Roscoe Moon. And the words, Dominic Bean said he wrote it. But I've often thought of my grandfather. My grandfather said he was coming down Inchicore Road one day, and the Black and Tans shot at a group of men, and they missed him. But he said he had his hand in his pockets. And I always thought that he was giving me, that it wasn't the fact that you could be shot for having your hands in your pocket, but in actual fact, it was a law they put out saying that if you are found with your hands in your pockets, you could be shot. And it was a reign of terror. And I think it was the first time ever the word terrorism was actually used by an authority, and that authority was the people in London that sent the Black and Tans, who were essentially an auxiliary police. They were to back up because they couldn't get the RUC, the young people, to join the RUC. So they sent in the Tans. And I think it was a terrible insult to all of the families of the men and women who fought for our freedom, to have those people as part of the commemoration. And I said that last week because Robert Emmet wrote a beautiful poem about Arbor Hill, and in it he said that when we commemorate our heroes, we commemorate them separately for what they were, men of liberty, and are not to be commemorated along with men of oppression. So the Black and Tans is a great song, and it's a song of passion, but it does justice to the terrorism that the Black and Tans brought to this country. It was horrific for the people that they lived through, people of Tipperary, all the stories. I have a book here, which was published in America, and this book was published in America, and it's eyewitness evidence of all the atrocities of the Black and Tans that they committed in Ireland in 1919, 1920, and early 21. And it's a revealing book. It's sad to read it. They murdered over 200 innocent people, summarily executed them. And it gives a lot of statistics, but it was compiled in America. And I don't know whether it's readily available, but anyone that wants to study what the Black and Tans were responsible for in Ireland, get that book and you'll read the testimony of people who suffered indeed barbarity and cruelty over the years.
Well, thank you very much, Derek. As Gabe Byrne often says, roll it there, Niamh.
I was born on a Dublin street where the loyal drums did beat. The loving English feet, they walked all over us. And every single night when me dad would come on tight, he'd invite the neighbours out to witness chorus. Come out, you black and tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show you I know you one medals down in Flanders. Turn out the IRA, made you run like hell away. Green and lovely lakes of Killashamble. Come let us hear you tell how you slandered great Parnell when you taught them well and truly persecuted. What are the sneers and jeers that you loudly let us hear when our leaders of 16 were executed? Come out, you black and tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show you I know you won medals down in Flanders. Tell her how the IRA made you run like hell away from the green and lovely lakes of Killashamble. Come tell us how you slew them old Arabs 2 by 2. Like the Zulus, they had spears and bow and arrows. Bravely you faced one with your 16-pound gun, and you frightened them damn natives to the marrow. Come out, you black and tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show you white how you won medals down in Flanders. Tell her how the IRA made you run like hell away on the green and lovely lakes of Killashamble. The time is coming fast and I think the day is near when each O'Neill he will run before us. And if there be a need, well our kids will say Godspeed, whatever sort to have seen this fine chorus. Come out, you black and tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show you white how you won medals down in Flanders. Tell her how the IRA made you run like hell away from the green and lovely lakes of Killashamble. I was born on a Dublin street where the loyal drums did beat. The loving English feet, they walked all over us. And every single night when me dad would come on tight, he'd invite the neighbours out to witness chorus. Come out, you black and tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show you white how you won medals down in Flanders. Tell her how the IRA made you run like hell away from the green and lovely lakes of Killashamble. Come out, you black and tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show you white how you won medals down in Flanders. Tell her how the IRA made you run like hell away from the green and lovely lakes of Killashamble.
Wow, what did you think of that? Pretty good, huh? I was looking at you all, I could see you all bopping along as well. That's the advantage of Zoom. was very, very interesting to see. Thanks so much, Derek. Now we're going to go on to the new panel. So we're going to have two panels of historians tonight. So I'm just going to introduce you to the first panel of historians. We are going to have Liz Gillis here tonight, who's an historian and author from the Liberties. She works as a researcher on the history show for RTE Radio and is the author of 6 books about the Irish Revolution, including Women of the Irish Revolution, which is brilliant, and the Hales Brothers and the Irish Revolution, which is even more brilliant. Liz has worked as a researcher on numerous publications, television and radio documentaries covering the period, as well as being in some of my documentaries. She's fantastic, and she was a recipient of the Lord Mayor's Award for her contribution to history. And we have some interesting stories about that we won't show on Zoom. Derek Molyneux, we also have, he's the co-author of When the Clock Struck in 1916 and Those of Us Who Must Die. Derek Molyneux has co-written these books with Darren Kelly, and I have to say, they just show it warts and all. They just show exactly what happened in as much detail, the horror, the blood, the guts, the gore, but that's what you need to do. You need to face up to your history 100 years after it's happened. You know, if you can't do it now, when can you do it? He's a fantastic historian. He'll be talking tonight too. We have Lima Donahue, who's a native of Hollyford. He's a retired school principal teacher. He's a local historian. He now lives near Thurles and has published some books on GAA themes. He has family connections with Sean Tracy and the O'Keefes of Glenloch. We also have Robert O'Keefe, who has a BA in English and History, where he was actually tutored by Stephen Ryan, who's also going to be speaking later on. He has done a really interesting dissertation on the autobiographies of the Irish in Britain. He's related to the O'Keefes in Glenloch. He's a prominent local Republican family. His house served as a meeting place and safe house for volunteers. His grandfather was a member of Dinny Lacey's Flying Column and a member of the local active service unit. So everybody, you're all very, very welcome here. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Good, yeah.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to maybe ask each person maybe 2 questions each. We'll just see how we go with time, and then we'll see how we go. So I'm going to start with Derek first. Derek, what is the strategy wide for burning the barracks?
Firstly, thanks for having me, and a big shout out to Kathleen over there. Well done, Kathleen. And I'd love to be down there this evening, tucking into those sandwiches. They were gorgeous last October, but we'll get there another day. The strategy for burning the barracks, originally articulated really by Ned Bright, but an incredibly effective strategy, which, you know, it kind of underscored the entire war from start to finish. I mean, there were barrack attacks. I mean, the other night I referred to, you know, the phony war between 1916 and 1919, 1920. This was going on. There was volunteers shot in April 1918 down in Gortaclee and outside Tralee, attacking the barracks for ammunition. But it was Ned Bright who really kind of formulated a strategy for alienating the RIC, but moreover, just driving them from more rural barracks, just clearing areas, clearing swathes of the country, so basically to decolate the King's Writ throughout vast areas of Ireland, to drive the law enforcement back to main urban centres and leave those areas for the Dáil administration, which worked very, very effectively, because the strategy was articulated to Michael Collins in early April. And soon afterwards, the Dáil was having meetings to set up their functioning civil service, which very, very effectively, given the conditions, supplanted the British administration in these areas and brought credibility to the revolution. So it was massive, it had a huge, absolutely huge effect on the overall picture.
Okay. Lima Donahue, Tipperary and the Hollyford area had a great tradition of resistance to British rule. Why was this?
Good evening, Marcus. Tipperary, before the War of Independence, was one of the most active in resistance to British rule. We could go back very far, but with time constraints, we'll just take it from the time of the Fenians, 1867. Tipperary had huge close connections with the Fenians, like John O'Mahony in Ballyneal, Michael Doheny in Feathered, John O'Leary, Tiptown, and not forgetting, I suppose, the most famous Tipperary man of them all at the time, Charles J. Kickham from Mullinahoe, whose impressive monument in Tipperary town was unveiled in 1898 by John O'Leary, and he influenced many young men and women of that generation. And those who passed by read the famous words on the monument, poet, novelist, but above all, patriot. And his book, Knock na Gao, beloved of generations of Tipperary people, with its subtitle, The Homes of Tipperary, and the character Matt the Thrasher, and the line for the credit of the little village, spelled out very clearly for everybody the importance of love of place, leading to love of country. And his songs, Slieve na Man, Tipperary's anthem, have such emotive lines as, "O my land, will you never uprise?" or "To see our flag unfurled," or poems like Rory of the Hill and Patrick Sheehan. These were all sold on ballot sheets, say in the market town, say in Tipperary town, or at the fair in Capawhite, and people were singing them at wakes and weddings and all the gatherings, celebrations of the time. And these and other ballads became very important to the people. The school system as well in the 19th century, the start of the national schools, there was great growth and increase in literacy among people, and newspapers were getting a more important role during those years as well. John C. Ryan from Carhu was quartermaster of the 3rd Battalion, 3rd Brigade. In his witness statements, he mentions that his uncle, Dan Ryan, was a member of the Fenian movement, and that there at his home, there was in the early years, there was a dump containing either 6 or 7 rifles of a very ancient type and pattern. Now, talking again of the Fenians, Ballyhurst, just outside Tipperary town, in 1867, the Fenians had a gathering there and an uprising there. And the local poet over towards Latin, Miles J.J. Finnan, he wrote, "It makes me sick to talk to you of those who agitate. Oh, give me but 10,000 men with rifles up to date. Then Saxon laws and Saxon rule may do their very worst to men behind the rifles, like the men of Ballyhurst." That's what was sung around Tipperary at the time. And the following year, we had the Battle of Ballycohy. When I was growing up in Hollyford, my father would often mention Ballycohy to us. If we were misbehaving, Marcus, he'd say, "If you don't settle down, I'll give you Ballycohy." And what happened at Ballycohy in 1868, the tenants resisted the hated landlord, William Scully, and the ambush Scully in Michael Dwyer's house, killing a policeman and a bailiff, and a bullet lodged in Scully's jaw, and it remained there for his lifetime. And Miles the poet was at it again. He wrote, "And Scully too was forced to yield, despite of his protecting shield. They bore him bloody from the field, whoever saw him after." And there was another great poet down there as well, Darby Ryan, the Bard of Ashgrove and Bancha, and he's famous for his satirical poems and ballads. In Tipperary also, Marcus, we had great clergymen, say starting out with Archbishop Croke, who was a very outspoken nationalist archbishop, much associated with the GAA. In Knockavilla and Donaskey, they had a great man from Palace Green, Father Matt Ryan, on Tahir Matt he's remembered as, and his support for the plan of campaign. In Thurles also you had Canon M.K. Ryan, an uncle of Paddy Ryan Lacken, quartermaster of the 6th Battalion in North Tipperary Brigade. Ardon Orion Semple Stadium is called after him. In Tiptown you had a clergyman, Father David Humphreys, and the story there of the withholding of rents and the setting up of New Tipperary. In Hollyford we had Father Matt Sampson, who was another champion as well and organised the anti-conscription collections at the time. And all those years you had the Gaelic revival. And I suppose I can't forget the influential teachers of the time. You had Edward Mansfield in Knockavilla and the Kerryman Cormac Branagh, who taught history to a lot of the revolutionaries. You had Tygo Callig. In Rossmore and Balloch you had Seamus Malone. You have Padraig Branagh or Paddy Walsh, who wrote a lot of songs, composed ballads like the Barracks at Ray, and he was drilling as well at Kilcommon, Rearcross and Upper Church. You also had Eamon O'Dear, Neddy Kate of Balloch, who was organising many areachtaí around where the music and song and dance and the culture of the Gael was there open for the RAC to be staring at. Coming into 1960 and the connections between, say, Thomas J. Clark, the first signatory of the proclamation. His mother was from Clogheen. She was Mary Palmer. And of course, Thomas MacDonough from Cloughjordan was there in Jacob's factory. He commanded the 2nd Volunteer Battalion. And one of his men there, a volunteer, was from Hollyford, from File Macduff, Phil Shanahan, who at that time had a pub there in Foley Street in the Monto. Liz has written extensively about him as well. And he also was part of funding the funding of guns that came in the odd from Germany in 1916. All of these things were happening. And of course, we also had Sean Tracy with Paddy Dwyer Croup from Boolnanon with Jim Gorman. So it was no surprise that the Hollyford IRA Company C was one of the biggest of the 3rd Battalion in the 3rd Brigade area. So all these influences, like pieces of the jigsaw, came together to give us the complete picture. They were just bricks in the wall, but together they made a wall of resistance, Marcus.
Absolutely, it was like the building blocks. It's fascinating, that actually. Robert O'Keefe, what factors might influence brigades at a local level?
Well, I suppose if you were planning an attack or an ambush, you had to have good intelligence firsthand. So, I mean, you needed to know what you were up against, how many people the enemy had in a barracks, what their patterns were. I mean, there was no point launching an attack on a barracks and finding that half of them were out on patrol and maybe going to come and enfilade you or whatever. Also, you had to look at the logistics of it, and there's a huge amount of planning went into any of those ambushes. For somewhere like Hollyford, there was 8 other stations in a ring around from where reinforcements could be drawn. So you had to put a plan in place. How are you going to stymie that? How are you going to slow down and stop reinforcements? So you needed a huge volume of people, really, because you were, as I say, putting chicanes on roads, you were knocking trees, digging trenches. There was quite a bit of planning went into getting all those people on site at one particular time. If you look at it as well, you had to get all these men in without arousing the suspicions of the police. You had to check all the arms and the ammunition. You know, was everything functioning as it should? You had to look at your lines of retreat. You had to keep at least one road open so that you had a way of escaping the scene. So as I say, when we talk about these ambushers and how brave they certainly were, there's no doubt on that. But that is maybe to ignore the logistical genius that went into organizing a lot of these things.
Absolutely, because the organization was incredible. We'll come back to that actually in a minute. I'm just going to go to Liz Gillis. Now Liz is going to be dealing with the weekend of the 3rd and 4th of April, where the GHQ would have sanctioned the attacks on the income tax offices and the evacuated RIC offices. So I'm going to ask her 2 questions kind of together for this section. Liz, you're very welcome. Can you tell us what happened on the 3rd and 4th of April?
Thanks, Marcus, and thanks to everyone for organising it. But yeah, basically on 3rd and 4th of April, the GHQ, a couple of days before that, they had sanctioned a nationwide campaign to destroy the income tax record, not the actual offices, not the buildings, just the income tax offices, and at the same time to physically destroy the evacuated RIC barracks. And this was a huge success. They did get word like a couple of days beforehand, but there's only 2 instances where they didn't succeed with burning the income tax records. But in terms of the RIC barracks, they took out in that weekend alone 218 RIC barracks. It was huge. And this is also GHQ, you know, putting their stamp on things, you know, making it a nationwide campaign, and they caught the administration completely off the guard, because the Brits had an idea that something was going to happen, as in there was going to be a rising, and because this was the actual anniversary, the 4th anniversary of the Easter Rising that happened to fall on that weekend. And they put a ring of steel around Dublin, put a ring of steel around Galway, took photographs, searching people and everything. And then all around the country, in like you're talking Tyrone, Belfast, Cork, Galway, Dublin, everywhere. The IRA just lit a massive fire in terms of burning the records and also burning the evacuated barracks.
Were the British distracted? Like, did they have any idea something like this was going to happen?
Wrong intelligence. Their intelligence was way off. As I said, if you see the photographs, the great one in the Daily Sketch, I think from the 5th of April, and, you know, the headline or the caption is, you know, ring of steel around Dublin and searching, you know, the people. There's like one photograph of, I think it's 5 or 6 soldiers searching one man. And so while they're busy doing this, the IRA were just lighting fire to everything other than Dublin, as in not having a rising, but they did take out the income tax offices in Dublin, as well as burning the records. Some offices were destroyed as well, but around the country, completely caught off guard.
With just last thing about this, what was the financial cost? I mean, if they're burning all these income tax offices, surely there must be a serious cost to this.
Huge, absolutely huge. And what was really important about this, because this then ties into what happens the following year, the burning of the Custom House, is that all of the originals were in the localities, and it left a nice copy in the Custom House. So you're talking thousands, hundreds of thousands of pounds. Like in one instance, it was £300,000, I think, in Galway, because they actually took out a building. The tax office was a complete building. And, you know, people do try to take advantage, including the government, who tried to put in a claim of over £300,000 to recoup the losses, the cost that would incur of recreating all of these files. And looked like they were getting away with it until someone said, hang on a minute, there's a copy of them up in Dublin. So they were trying to pull a fast one and trying to make the people pay for it, but they didn't. But it was huge. The loss was huge. It went into hundreds of thousands of pounds.
Thanks very much. Derek, how important were the big four of Dan Breen, Sean Tracy, Seamus Robinson and Sean Hogan to the strategic situation? Can you join the dots?
I can, but just before I do, just in relation to the strategic situation on what Liz spoke about there, it's really, really important as well with what happened in Easter 1920 to bear in mind that, you know, with the recent arrival of the Black and Tans, the British strategy at that point was to go back and retake all these rural barracks. Now, when they were denied that, it kind of messed up the strategy of General Macready, who took over shortly afterwards. Macready came to Ireland, and his strategy was a mobile one. He wanted to get troops roving around the countryside in trucks, you know, taking over these areas. When the barracks were gone, it pretty much scuppered that. It put a lot more pressure on in terms of British transport. Macready tried to circumvent that by bringing over hundreds of transports. He had a big fight with his own senior command in order to do that. But then what happened when he eventually did get them over? You had the rail embargo. Everything that just kind of, all these dominoes more or less fell in terms of the overall strategy in relation to denying the British, the Crown, the use of these barracks. It was a monumental strategy. In relation to, well, the big four, I mean, their impact was colossal. There's no other way to word it. Sola Hedbeg, there was a lot of things on the table before Sola Hedbeg happened. There was a Viscount Haldane had been brought over by Lord French. Lord French, he'd come over in 1918 and he wanted to basically crush any sort of, you know, nationalist revolutionary organizations with an iron fist. But by early 1919, he was starting to see that might not work. So he brought Richard Haldane over, and he got Haldane to have some discreet back-channel conversations with Sinn Féin. And there was a very, very tentative progress towards Dominion status. That's what Haldane suggested. It was the first real kind of time that Dominion status got bandied about. Now, there was huge resistance. The likes of Walter Long, he just laughed at the whole thing. He said, that's just not going to happen. They were up against a brick wall, but nonetheless, French was very, very keen on the idea. He sent Haldane to speak to some senior Sinn Féin people who came back with, quote unquote, they wouldn't pull the house down on his head in relation to Dominion status if there was concessions given, like releasing the German plot in Germany at the time. Sola Hedbeg completely it just wiped that off the table. As far as French was concerned, it was now, they were going to use the iron fist. There was going to be no more talking. So it was a benchmark in that sense. The Big Four, okay, well, I mean, you had the Knocklong rescue for a start. You had a couple of policemen shot dead. There was a subsequent inquest where the jury ruled that the responsibility for the deaths of the policemen was with the Crown, not with their killers. GHQ were taking note of this because all the while, you know, there was moves getting made up in Dublin, you know, in relation to, you know, going after the likes of G Division. So they were sort of, it was like a litmus test to judge the public reaction. And then there was a further litmus test then when D.I. Hunt was shot dead down in Turles. And again, nobody went to his aid. So GHQ were scratching their chins and watching while they were getting ready to make their own moves up in Dublin. So, I mean, Knocklong was influential in that regard. However, when they got to Dublin, you know, they bolstered the fledgling squad. They made themselves available for operations. There were several attempts to take out Lord French that didn't work. He was a wily old fox. He knew how to alternate his routes when he was travelling around. If he was going to, say, Trinity College, for example, he'd make sure that he was leaving by a different direction every time. But eventually, of course, they got him. Although they didn't kill him, but they came very, very close to killing him. Now, it's arguable that ambush would not have happened had the Big Four not been in Dublin, because on the previous evening when Mick MacDonald was trying to get the ducks in a row in order to carry out the ambush, he didn't have enough men. And December the 19th was a working day. And I know it sounds kind of ridiculous that, you know, revolutionaries couldn't turn up at the revolution because they had to go to work, but that was the world that they lived in. But the Big Four were available. And so word was sent out to them the night before just to kind of, you know, make themselves ready at the last minute. So they did. They went out and, okay, the ambush, you know, it was ultimately unsuccessful because Lord French's staggering look. However, after the ambush, Lord French realised that the IRA really, really had to be taken seriously. It just struck home with him that their own intelligence just did not work. They didn't even have a whisper of advance warning of this.
Yeah.
You also had, it really, really struck home, not only with French, but also with the Chief Secretary, Macpherson. In January, you saw internment getting brought in as a result. You also had Assistant Inspector Redmond, who was brought down from Belfast there at the turn of 1919, 1920 to rejig G Division. He was brought down at French's behest because somebody needed to basically put you know, a bit of backbone into G Division as far as he was concerned. Redmond lasted 3 weeks, and that was the end of G Division as an effective organisation. This stemmed from Ashtown. Ashtown, in no small part, stemmed from the Big Four. But further to that as well, French also introduced internment at the end of January 1920, basically because of what had happened in Ashtown, in no small part. Internment subsequently led to the hunger strikes of April 1920. And when they were successful at the time, April 1920, as Liz said, everything, it was pivotal. Everything hinged on April 1920, because with the hunger strikes being successful and General Macready only having arrived over to take command and then having to back down to the hunger strikers, it completely demoralised the police and the British Army. They had went out and locked all these guys up, and now they were being let go because they were on hunger strike. This had huge effects. I mean, even down the road. I mean, for example, Kevin Barry was he wasn't reprieved. Macready refused to reprieve him because he recollected what the surrender to the hunger strikers in April had done to police and army morale. So he wasn't going to back down again. And as we know, the impact that Kevin Barry's hanging had on the whole propaganda picture. A lot of this stemmed from the Big Four's involvement in the Ashtown ambush. Also, afterwards, when it came to Sean Tracy, when things were really starting to heat up in October 1920, and the IRA was, you know, September, October, it's fair to say that they were on the back foot. You know, the British had brought in dozens, scores of agents. They were starting to make progress. There were moves being made by GHQ, which ultimately culminated in Bloody Sunday. But on the day that Sean Tracy died, that evening, there was a conclave, a secret conclave took place up in, I think it was Airfield Road up in Rathgar, the home of Julia O'Donovan. And this was hot on the heels of Tracy's killing. And it's an unassailable fact that what was spoken about that night accelerated the plans to what happened on Bloody Sunday. If you think about how close Tracy was with McKee and how pivotal McKee was in terms of the planning and the organisation of Bloody Sunday. So in a nutshell, from Sola Headbeg, which took any prospect of peace off the table, to the drastic acceleration of the war at Ashtown in December 1919, which led to, you know, the domino effects of so many pivotal events in 1920, ultimately culminating in Sean Tracy's killing. They had a huge effect. That's before you get to the likes of Dan Breen's huge persona.
Well, we're going to the Barrack attacks now, though, but that's fascinating how you can kind of weave that together. It's
yeah, it is
really unbelievable what an important part they were in the entire War of Independence. Liam, great planning must have gone into the attack on Hollyford Barracks. Can you tell us some more about this?
Yes, Marcus, there was approximately 100 men involved in it, and Tyke Dwyer tells us in his witness statement that 63 from his battalion took part in it, and 24 of these were from the C Company, Hollyford Company. Paddy Dwyer, crew from the Cross of Bulnanon, who had been at Salahead Beg, wasn't one of those taking part. He was in Cork jail at the time. He had been arrested at a raid which involved Sergeant Rohan, who was the sergeant in the barracks in Hollyford at the time, identified him. Dan Breen wasn't there. You've mentioned Dan there recently. Dan, although he says in his book he was, there's lots of evidence that he wasn't there. The decision to attack Hollyford was made in Keeves at Glenloch, but most of the planning was done nearer to the village. And it was decided that the attack would be led by Ernie O'Malley, and his second in command on the night was Seamus Robinson, officer commanding Tip Brigade, and other officers there were Brigade Vice Commandant Sean Tracy, Commandant of the 3rd Battalion, Tyke Dwyer, John C. Ryan, Quartermaster of the 3rd Battalion, and Lieutenant Jim Gorman. Gorman is an interesting character. He had military experience, having fought with the Australian Army in World War I. Gorman, he was not only experienced, but he was also a crack shot, and he had trained the Kilcommon Upper Church and Hollyford companies intensively, especially in the use of ground to conceal a slow advance. And much of the planning was done near the village at Shanahan's and File Macduff by Robinson, Tracy and O'Malley. Now this house is about a mile from the village, and Shanahan's was the home of Phil Shanahan, who at this time, as we mentioned earlier, was a publican of Foley Street in the Monto. And he had taken part in the 1916 rebellion and had huge influence on the attack in Hollyford. And he was also a member of the 1st Dáil. Now, all available weapons and explosives in the battalion were ordered to Hollyford for inspection and preparation. And it was originally planned to use gelignite, but they were advised by Jim Gorman that they were wasting their time, that it was easier to blow up the rocket cashel as to attempt Hollyford Barracks with that gelignite. He explained that the inside of the barracks was 6 feet above the outside level, and this made a nonsense of the original attack, the original plan. So they set their sights now on burning the barracks with paraffin and petrol, and supplies of this were ordered from Tipperary town to be delivered to Hollyford Creamery, where it would be stored. And in May 1919, 450 2-gallon tins of petrol had been seized by the IRA from the Anglo-American company at their Limerick Junction premises. And this was used in many of the attacks, including Hollyford. It used to be carried around in milk churns, and there was over 50 gallons of petrol and paraffin used in the Hollyford attack. Gelignite was plentiful. They had the 1919 Salhead Beg ambush gelignite. There was 180 pounds of that from that raid. And they had the 1917 gelignite that was taken, a half a ton of that from Malloy's in Thurles. They also had detonators from Thurles. O'Malley made bursting charges by packing gelignite into tin cans. And when this charge was exploded, areas of slate would be blown away, and the sound of the explosives would be disconcerting to the police. Sean Tracy had been making improvised grenades by using tin cans, mustard tins, snuff boxes, cocoa tins, all of these packed with broken bits of iron pots. Sean Tracy had been experimenting also on gelignite captured in Solihull Beg for the development of mud bombs, and using the sticky clay yallowee and ignited by a fuse. And when thrown, the clay stuck to the walls, buildings or roofs before exploding. And later experiments revealed that if you put a coat of linseed oil on these, it gave greater adhesion. Ernie O'Malley stated that they practiced these mud bombs on the roofs of deserted farms, and they were quite successful. Now, to go to guns and shotguns, the shotguns were allotted to the men that were on the outpost duties on the roadblocks, and that left about 7 or 8 rifles with 80 rounds of .303 ammunition. There was more ammunition to come from the Mid-Tipperary Brigade, but at the planning stage this wasn't available, although it came later on, and O'Malley issued strict orders that only every 5 minutes or so a rifle shot was to be fired. Now the ladders, if they were going to burn the roof, ladders were very important. So Tig Dwyer and 6 men with him were in charge of procuring ladders to put them in place. And because of the height involved, no one ladder was sufficient. So he got local tradesmen to splice 3 or 4 ladders together to get sufficient height. Picked men from the Rossmore company hoisted the ladders. Ernie's ladder had to be shifted as he wanted it to lie against the top of the chimney. Being together gave them the advantage of helping each other in case either got wounded or severely burned. So they ended up with 2 ladders anyway. William Hanley in his witness statement said, between 11 and 12 o'clock that night, our section moved off from Shanahan's with the 2 ladders, and the smaller men being in front and the taller men behind to facilitate the raising of the ladders against the barrack wall. And under O'Malley's direction, the ladders were quickly put in position, one in front, about 2 feet from the gable corner, and the other against the gable, about 2 feet from the same corner. It has to be said that this section, the men left off their boots as they left Shanahan's and were now in their stockinged feet. Most, if not all of them, also carried revolvers. There's 6 roads come together, Marcus, in Hollyford, and each of these had to be blocked with roadblocks. And O'Malley was very particular about these, and that everyone manning them knew what was expected of them. And the barricaded roads, they cut the telephone and telegraph connections at a specified time. Sean Tracy had ordered his men to hold their fire until the first volleys roared from the loopholes and the grenades burst around them. The main cover for the frontal assault riflemen was a low stone wall on the road facing the entrance to the barracks, and these were armed with shotguns and rifles. The attack was timed to commence around midnight, and at about 11:30, Sean Tracy, Phil Fitzgerald, Roddy Hanley, Jim Gorman, John C. Ryan went into Hollyford, and they first of all moved the barrel of paraffinial and a supply of inflammable material from the creamery where they had earlier left it to the side of the road beside the barracks. And there they decided on the positions to be taken up by the riflemen. Tracy, Fitzgerald, Hanley and John C. Ryan with 4 rifles occupied a position behind a wall at the bridge, about 40 yards to the front of the barracks. Jack Ryan, this Jack the Master, was our sole rifleman, they say, at the rear of the barracks, and Sean Hogan was the remaining rifleman who was detailed to cover a porthole in the gable wall at that end. As O'Malley told the men, don't shout. A silent attack is what we want. A silent attack would make the defenders feel the unknown quantity of it. It would unsteady their nerves and make them more uncertain in the darkness as to what was coming next. And a nice touch, Marcus, as they left Shanahan's. Before they left, and in thanking Shanahan's for the hospitality, they all shaved themselves before they went to do their night's work.
You got to look good, you know, when you're attacking the barracks. Thanks very much for that, Liam. Robert, just last question for the panel. What networks were there? Like, it wasn't just Tipperary, there were other brigades as well from other areas.
Well, I suppose, yeah, the brigade system was kind of an unnatural imposition on the countryside. There were existing traditions of cooperation that crossed any borders. One of, say, Tipperary's first actions was, as Liam alluded to, the raid in Thurles at Malloy's Hardware for Gaelic Night, and that was attended by people from North Tip, Mid Tip and West Tipperary. So there would have been a lot of familial connections as well. A lot of the Republican community would have had family ties. For example, Mayors of Anfield and O'Keefe's of Glenlock were cousins. Sean Tracy was a cousin of the O'Keefe's as well. Stapletons in Barracks were related to Lahys. The Yancarty in East Limerick was related to many of the people in the Hollyford battalion, in the Hollyford company. So there were existing networks of people. Also, you had a lot of these people would have known each other through, as Liam alluded to earlier, the intercessions of people like Father Matt Ryan, Pádraig Brannock, Eamon O'Dear. Certainly post the volunteer split, the Republican community would have been small. So they would have all known each other. When a dance was being held in Éireacht, they would have travelled from a 30-mile radius to come to these things. So they would have known each other. As the war ground on, you would have seen a lot of, say, the Tip guys going out to Doon, maybe, to safe houses, and vice versa. The Limerick people would come down for respite into Tipperary. The same arose in Kilkenny, Mullinahone, up around Callan. There was a certain cross-pollination of ideas. Similarly, down around Waterford, anywhere that you had border areas, they were not hard borders, they were porous. Ideas, men and munitions crossed at various times as was necessitated.
Okay, well, thanks very much. Now that ends panel one. I think you got a great insight into panel one's discussions regarding how the brigades were got together, the Hollyford attack. What we're going to do is, you got a treat for you now. What we have is we have poetry and we have some music. So I'd just like to say thank you, first of all, to Derek, Liam, Liz and Robert. If you have any questions, please post them below and we'll ask at the end. There's people here that are posting from Australia, we've people here from Scotland, America, everywhere really. So it's not just Trasin here, it's Trasin the globe. So I just want to introduce the next person that we have. We have Mike Power, who's going to read a bit of poetry. Now, it's well worth tuning in for this. This is good. He's a Power who was raised in a thatched house on top of a hill in Drangan, like 12 generations before him, so the blood goes deep. He's the son of Paddy Power, a historian and local Drangan poet. He's the grandson of Mick Power of C Company 7 Battalion of the 3rd Tipperary Brigade, and Josephine Babs White Drangan of Cummin. So over to you, Mike Power.
Thanks for the introduction, Marcus. So just to give the history of it, I'm just going to give a few verses I put together to mark the commemoration and the times we're in at the minute. As you said, the father was a local historian and poet, and I know maybe some small bit of it has rubbed off on me. So without further ado, I'll give the virus verses, and anyone have any complaints, they can send them to Niamh Hassett, who has strong-armed me into this tonight. So now, the virus verses. 102 years ago, while the fluid was Spanish, and the people of Drangan hoping Crown forces would vanish, here we are now, just after elections, coming to terms with pandemic infections. It was looking like office for old Mary Lou before the country got struck down with bad flu. Poor old Led Morris locked up in Crahan because of a virus that came from Wuhan. Phillies is closed now, not the stir of a mouse. The 4P's closed also in Johnny Mac's corner house. My poor old father, Paddy Power, well, what would he think that we're left in a country where you can't get a drink? He timed his exit well after 80 years of fun, and even managed to have an anniversary tractor run. The supermarket's empty, the shelves are a farce, the public at home and can't wipe an arse. The kids have TikTok, Instagram and the Snapchat, the old in isolation because I flew from a bat. All the good scribes, they are gone, all that's left is Tom Noonan. The father is missed and his tales and lampooning. 100 years gone, the barracks were burning. Now on its head, the world is turning. Commemorations were planned and the world is upended. Best laid plans of Hassets and friends are suspended. Next year, please God, we will have celebrations and Michael Maroney on hand to give us orations. The conflicts are long ended, but we remember the lost and the many lives of the parish that the Tan War it did cost. In October of 20, the first man of the parish would fall when we lost the bold Tom Donovan on the street in Killinall. Then on a dark night in November, Pat Clancy, while making his way home, was ambushed by Lichford and would ne'er again roam. Then in March 21, we took a savage blow and lost 3 great men ambushed above in Knockrow. Martin Clancy fell wounded and was shot where he lay. Then down went Pat Hackett to Lewis gun spray. Then last in the shed, Richard Clement from my glass. Lincoln's tossed in grenades and he breathed his last. Now I thank you for listening and I'll finish up quick. Last mention to 2 lost neighbours, the Sadlers, Dinny and Nick. Now look forward to the day when we're together in one room, but thankful we are that at least we have Zoom. But for now, stay home, stay safe and stay clean. We'll gather again to remember Mally Robinson, Tracy and Breen. Thank you very much, folks.
That was brilliant. Fair play to you, really and truly. Next up, we have got a really interesting performance, and it's very, very appropriate too. Shannon Morrissey is from Cashel, and she sings with the Limerick Jazz Ensemble Ed Hansom's band, and her great-granduncle was Paddy Vernock, whose home is in Cashel, and it was raided by the Black and Tans following his desertion of the British Army in 1917. Now, Paddy went up to North Tip and went under the name of Paddy O'Dwyer. He also features in a documentary I made, where he served with Paddy Ryan Lacken. Paddy wrote many songs like Tipperary So Far Away and The Barracks of Ray. So Niamh Hassett is playing the role of Roisin from the Gay Byrne Show. So roll it the gang there, Niamh, please.
They gathered from valleys and highland, from their homes by the rivers and drills, to fight for the freedom of Ireland that night in the heart of the hills. They were the bravest of soldiers, no cowards or braggarts were they. They marched with their guns on their shoulders to burn like the barracks at Ray. Here's to the men of Tipperary who trod through the mountains that day, with spirits light-hearted and airy, to burn like the barracks at Ray. 'Twas the dawn when the barracks was blazing, our boys on the roof had crept down. The sight of the flames was amazing, they lit the whole country around. Then everywhere bullets was flying and grenades in there did explode. Saxon still kept on replying while the Gael did respond and reload. Here's to the men of Tipperary who trod through the mountains that day, with spirits light-hearted and airy, to burn like the barracks at Ray. The Republican army lay waiting, the sun high up in the sky. The fire still rolled on unabating, and a sergeant for England did die. The time was now close. hearted and airy to burn like the barracks at Bray. Keep their names evergreen, men of air and walls shining from shore rivers flow. Remember their courage and daring, and we'll rid our dear country of foe. Join up now, our boys, and get ready. Prepare for the oncoming fray. Drill and be cool, calm and steady, like the boys at the barracks at Bray.
Well, I think you can all say that was pretty fantastic. I think that was so appropriate. There's one thing though, just before I go into panel 2, I was just seeing a comment that I wouldn't mind reading out because I think it's lovely. Angela Clancy has said she's watching with her mother, who's 94, who's from Barracks, and her mother used to tell stories of the Black and Tans. And we just like to say hello to Angela and her mother. Okay, so we're now going to go into panel number 2. So who we have is Michael Maroney, Dan Jack, Stephen Ryan, and myself. Can you all hear me, lads?
Yes, yes,
Yep.
Marcus.
Okay, no problem at all. Well, let me just introduce you all first for those people who don't know who you are. Shame on them for not knowing, but let's introduce you anyway. Michael Maroney is from Drangan, County Tipperary. He received a Bachelor's of Education degree from Mary Immaculate College in Limerick. His father and uncle were involved in the War of Independence and on the Republican side in the Civil War. Michael's uncle, Nicholas Maroney, was involved in planning the attack on Drangan Barracks with Sean Tracy. Michael's granduncles, the Egan's of Pulacapel, Mullinahone, took part in the War of Independence and took the Republican side in the Civil War. His granduncle, Jim Egan, was killed in the last weeks of the Civil War, and Michael is in Waterford and is a member of the 3rd Tipperary Brigade Old IRA Commemoration Committee. We also have got Stephen Ryan, Dr. Stephen Ryan, who is currently a lecturer in modern Irish history at Mary Immaculate College. He received his PhD from the University of Limerick in 2017. Stephen is a great-grandnephew of Paddy Ryan Lacken, who participated in the attack on Rearcross Barracks. And we also have Daniel Jack, who had given a talk earlier with Tras na Tíre. He hails from the Clonard area of West Belfast. He has a deep-seated family connection to the district, including a relationship through his maternal lineage to 3rd Tipperary Brigade OC Seamus Robinson, who came originally from the area, one of the big 4. Daniel possesses a keen interest in local and national history, with a particular emphasis on the development of Irish republicanism in the early 20th century. He's a founder member of Oras E. Connelia, which is the Connolly Museum and Interpretive Centre located on the Falls Road and dedicated to James Connolly. He has also recently published Citizen Soldier, a biography on the life of Seamus Robinson. So gentlemen, you're all very welcome. And Michael, I'll start with you. Can you tell me about this attack on Drangan? How long did this attack last?
The attack lasted probably about 7 hours. It's thought that it probably started around 10:30 when the men were put in place, and it was strictly ordered by Sean Tracy that it be a silent attack. However, that order was scuppered pretty fast when the men took their positions, and the dogs of the village started to bark, and I suppose that gave the game away and that there was something afoot. And I think 4 men came out of the barracks to make an inspection of the village and see what was going on. One of them was captured and held. The other 3 escaped back into the barracks, and there they stayed till they surrendered in early morning.
Okay. And Dan Jack, can you tell me about the brigade leadership that would have been around then? Dan here, maybe he's mute, is he? Well, I'll tell you what, Michael, I'll just ask you one more question about Drangan, and then I'll go on to Stephen Ryan and go back to Dan then. Michael, could you tell us about the people that were involved? Were they all from Drangan or not?
No, a significant number of them were from Drangan, but the plans for the attack on Drangan Barracks were made on Sunday the 30th of May 1920, when Sean Tracy, Sean Hogan met Nicholas Maroney and Tom Donovan at Nicholas's house, my uncle's house, where I grew up, in Ballynenan. And there the arrangements were made to plan the attack. The meeting went on till about 12:30. They were about to retire to bed at about 1 o'clock in the morning when Nicholas Maroney suggested to Tracy that the date for the attack be changed. The original date was for Sunday, the 6th of June.
Okay.
And my uncle Nicholas suggested to Tracy that it might be an idea to have it on Thursday, the 3rd of June instead, because that was Corpus Christi, a holy day, and it was also the date of the local elections in the area. And he thought that maybe strangers wouldn't be as noticeable in the village with elections going on as they might otherwise have been. So Tracy thought about it for a short time. He said he would think about it, but he said he'd need to inspect the village first of all. So at 1 o'clock in the morning, they left Maroney's house and they walked the 2.5 miles into the village and inspected the village. On the way back, Tracy inspected it silently, which kind of leads me to believe that he wasn't just a man of action, but he was a contemplative, thoughtful man as well. He inspected the village in silence. They went all around the village, and on the way home, he suddenly told Nicholas that he had decided that it would be held on Thursday, the 3rd of June, instead of the Sunday.
Okay.
Sean Hogan, around the same time, made a visit to Commandant Jim Ruhan in Callan and in County Kilkenny in the 7th Battalion of the Kilkenny Brigade. And he asked him to supply some well-trained riflemen for the attack. And on the Thursday, Jim Ruhan called to Cahals of Capper Henry to where a hurling game was being held by the Ahanur Battalion and Ahanur Company, and he got 8 volunteers to come to Drangan. So they were on their way when they got a dispatch saying that the road from Callan to Kilkenny was still open. So he sent Lyda Holden back to make sure that road was closed. All of the local companies in the villages and parishes surrounding Drangan had been ordered to block the roads entering Drangan for the duration of the attack. And that was done by all of those local battalions. The Mullinahone Company, which is the next village to Drangan, that complete company turned out in Mullinahone to surround the RIC barracks in Mullinahone and to prevent any RIC men going to Drangan to rescue their comrades up there. Jack Brett and his cousin Jack Gardner acted as dispatch riders between Drangan and Mullinahone throughout the night to keep both companies in contact with each other and let them know what was going on. Ned Halley and Paddy Cody met Jim Ruhan the night before, and they were ordered to block the roads around Kilmanagh in Kilkenny. Ned Halley asked Mick Maher of Ballylarkin to block the roads from Kilmanagh also.
Okay. Okay.
So that was the arrangements that were made for the attack. And then on the night, it appears to me that the mostly Drangan company members, company volunteers, took the front of the barracks. They were stationed in Mike Slattery's hay barn and in Mike Slattery's farmyard across the road from the barracks. When the RIC men came out to inspect what was going on with the dogs barking and everything, one of them was captured, as I said before, and some of the RIC members in the barracks started to fire on the hay barn. So it started probably before they had intended it, before the IRA had intended it to start. And then when the Callan men were arriving in, the 7 volunteers with Jim Ruhan from Callan, they had to take cover down the street before they could be put into position. And they had to crawl on their hands and knees to their positions at the rear of the barracks. They took up position at the rear of the barracks, but came under serious gunfire from the barracks, and they had to go back to a ditch behind so that they could get some cover from the gunfire that came from the barracks. The gunfire that came from the barracks was far more than they had expected. There was, I think, about 9 RIC men and a black and tan in the barracks. And they put up a strong fight throughout the night. There was intervals between gunfire, but there was strong gunfire from both sides towards the barracks and from the barracks out towards the volunteers, both in front and behind. Meanwhile, while this gunfire was going on, Sean Tracy, Ernie O'Malley, Tom Donovan, and some of the Cashel volunteers who came from Cashel, Paddy Hogan, Tom Taylor, and Ned Grogan, they were breaking into a bicycle repair shop beside the barracks. It was a lower level building than the barracks, and the plan was to make a hole up through the roof of that building, put up a ladder onto the roof of the barracks, and then to start breaking holes in the barracks roof, and to I see Cormac O'Malley is showing a photograph of the barracks, which is pretty much the same today, but in better repair. So it went on through the night, 7 hours altogether, and at one stage, Captain Jack Foley, captain of the Drangan Company, was wounded in the shoulder. Paddy Ryan from Mullinahone brought him down to Dr. Conlon. Dr. Conlon had been asked by the local company to remain in Boland's house on the Mullinahone Road to treat any of those who might be injured. Paddy Ryan from Mullinahone brought Captain Jack Foley down to Dr. Conlon, and Pod Egan from Mullinahone took up the slack when they were gone. Pod Egan had not known about the attack till he met Lar Breen in Mullinahone, a brother of Dan's, and Lar was there on account of the elections also. Lar told Pod Egan. Pod Egan went home, got the rifle which he had come by after the Hugginstown barracks attack, put it in a sackcloth, tied it to his bicycle, and cycled up to Mullinahone also.
Well, just let me bring in Dan Jack here, because we have him back.
Very good.
Dan, can you tell me about the Brigade Leadership?
Yes, Marcus, I think the key thing, and it's been mentioned a few times tonight, is that the Brigade Leadership were not armchair generals, they were men of action. Cormac mentioned earlier about the way in which the brigades were elected. So Seamus Robinson, Sean Tracy, Dan Breen, and so forth were all elected by their comrades, and I think that bears testimony to the confidence that the men had in their leadership. I think Seamus Robinson, he fought in the Easter Rising. He was active in the O'Connell Street area during that week, and he witnessed and experienced at firsthand the devastating impact that explosives and fire could have. He also was hemmed in by sniper and machine gun fire, so he had experience of being besieged. I think it's also fair to say that Seamus Robinson, along with Sean Tracy and Dan Breen, as has been mentioned tonight, were all participants in the Salahead Beg ambush. They took part in the Knocklong rescue of Sean Hogan. Breen and Sean Tracy were injured in that attack. So that actually had a bit of a negative impact on the area in that it displaced the brigade leadership. they had to recuperate from their injuries, but they were also hunted. There was searches all over for them. But they eventually ended up in Dublin, but they did gain more operational experience in Dublin. It's already been mentioned that they took part in the early operations against the political detectives. They took part in the Icetown ambush as well. So they had operational experience, and more importantly, they were prepared to lead from the front.
Okay, which is very important. Yeah, absolutely. Not like in World War One. Stephen Ryan, what was Cross Brigade participation like? Was it authorised?
Thank you, Marcus. It was not. It was carried out independently. Robert there spoke about the unnatural imposition of brigade borders, and certainly Rearcross fell very close to some of these borders. And this meant that there were relationships that spanned the borders. Rearcross itself was in the 1st Tipperary Brigade, and there had been some internecine conflict in the 1st Tipperary Brigade. There had been an element of distrust, and I think as well a lot of the reason why this had an effect in Rearcross specifically was for reasons geographical, topographical, historical and cultural. Geographical in its proximity to the border of the different brigades, but also topographical in that because of the location of the hills with relation to Rearcross, it meant it somewhat alienated from the headquarters of the brigade itself. Historical in that because it was located again in such a rural area, there was a tradition of independence, and this was a cultural element as well. And indeed, Ernie O'Malley, in his book Raids and Rallies, he spoke about this independence, but he also spoke about the loyalties that existed within the area itself. He spoke about how when people were approached to participate in say an attack such as the attack on Rearcross Barracks, that it was almost like a funeral, in that people wanted to be part of an attack when their neighbour invited them to come and take part. They wanted to be there. It was sort of a community duty to participate. So these were all reasons why I suppose what happened in Rearcross was carried out independently. Now, there had been plans by the brigade headquarters to take Rearcross. Previous attacks in Ballylanders and in Kilmallock, as well as in Borrisokane in that particular brigade, had all adjacent buildings attached to the barracks. And this was significant that they were adjacent, because it meant that they had an in, they had a way of attacking the barracks. Okay. So it was definitely on their agenda. However, it was carried out independently, and people from all of the 3 Tipperary brigades, as well as the East Limerick Brigade, all came into Rearcross to participate. Now, it became problematic when Patrick Doherty of the 5th Battalion, he got wind of what was happening, and it was meant to take place on the Saturday, the 11th of July, 1920. But when he got wind of what was happening, he decided that he should go and inform Frank McGrath, who was commanding officer of the brigade, who issued a countermanding order. Ernie O'Malley being present and he being answerable to General Headquarters, took control of the situation and decided, since there was no reason for it to be cancelled, that it would go ahead the following day. And it did. And indeed, Sean Tracy, who had come from the 3rd Tipperary Brigade into Rearcross, he decided, because of his position, it wouldn't have been deemed acceptable for someone from one brigade to move into another brigade and take part. He decided to take himself out of the the leadership equation, and Ernie O'Malley took control of the attack on the brigade. So it was very much independently constructed. But again, it's interesting to see the dynamics that worked between the different brigades. And what I find myself personally quite curious was this happened on the very same month that Michael Collins in General Headquarters decided to endorse the idea of flying columns, which would transform that that inter-brigade relationship.
Okay, and I just wanted to ask Dan as well, just because it's relating to that. We'll give everybody just one more question. Can you tell me, Dan, did Seamus Robinson get injured, or anything about Jim Gorman maybe you want to mention?
Yeah, I think Seamus Robinson and Ernie O'Malley having to go up onto the rooftop of the barracks. It was a pretty precarious place to be. They had to be self-sufficient to a great extent, so they were laden with tins of petrol, with revolvers, with hammers and so forth. So they had to break the slates of the roofs and pour in the flammable material and then try and stoke the flames. So they were using the bursting charges, the grenades and so forth. So both Robinson and O'Malley were severely burned during the attacks on Hollyford, and as well during Drangan. So it was a pretty precarious place for them to be, and certainly they had numerous lucky escapes on the night in question.
Okay. Michael Maroney, I wanted to ask you, if possible, just generally, I mean, I know your focus is on Drangan, but just generally, how successful were these attacks on the barracks in Tipperary?
Well, they seem to be very successful, I would say. Drangan was completely successful. It took longer than they probably thought it would, but it was completely successful in that only one, maybe two people were wounded on the night. There were some burns, as Daniel Jack has said, of some of those who took part in the attack on the roof as well. But they were very successful in that all of the arms in the barracks was captured in Drangan. And there were a number of boxes of 303 ammunition. There were all sorts of, I'll just read out here what was captured. There was, they captured rifles, carbines, shotguns, revolvers, ammunition, and very light pistols. And so they achieved their objective really in that they closed down the barracks and they captured all the ammunition and arms that were in the barracks, and there was nobody killed, you know, so it was pretty successful. I can't speak about the rest of them. I'm not as familiar with the rest as I am with Drangan, but very successful.
Oh, no, but it gives a great insight into it. No, absolutely. Thanks very much. Stephen Ryan, were there any contradictory accounts?
By and large, for Rearcross itself, the accounts tended to be, the meat of the information tended to be generally the same. It was interesting earlier, Liam just mentioned about Dan Breen's absence, whereas in his own account at Hollyford and Drangan, he had placed himself there. But it's interesting as to why this account was developed. I mean, this was published very, very soon after the War of Independence. And of course, because of Dan Breen's activity in and around this period, it was probably only drafted himself in notes and given to a lady, Kathleen O'Doherty in Philadelphia, to compile and to make this up as a dramatic book that would act almost as a very early propaganda tool for Irish nationalists and Republicans. So it's interesting the reason why this would be the case, whereas Ernie O'Malley's is far more reflective, and it I suppose is far more introspective as to what was actually happening at the time. It is interesting. One of the things that captures my imagination, particularly about Rearcross, would be the differing accounts with regards to Flannery, who would have owned the adjacent building in Rearcross to the barracks. Flannery himself, according to Ernie O'Malley, he was somebody who had supplied drink and supplied to the RIC, to the Black and Tan in Rearcross. He'd supplied goods to them at the time when there was a boycott going on. Interestingly then, from a different perspective, in Dan Breen's account, he speaks about him very highly, about how he supplied brandy to Ernie O'Malley during the account. And I just find it interesting, the different perspectives that are supplied, and indeed why they're supplied.
Absolutely, absolutely. That was great, gentlemen. Thanks so much for that. Now, we're going to take 3 questions that I've been sent to ask, because if I ask every question, we'll be here all night. Okay, so we've been on from 7:30, so 3 questions and then we're done. So it's going to be to all the historians. Some questions are pointed towards specific historians, so I'll just ask those 3. One thing I do want to say before we go on is Lisa Canty is honoured to be watching this about my grandfather, Jim Gorman, who is one of the grandchildren from Ireland and Chicago, online here tonight, and some great-grandchildren, 8 of his grandchildren. You're very welcome. Please, please, please watch the 1920 burning of the Barracks, because we have Jim Gorman in a lot. Now, just to ask some of the questions here. The first question we're going to ask to either, well, we'll take it for Liz or Derek, I suppose, if you could unmute Liz or Derek. If you could just quickly maybe answer this, if that's okay. Why was the IRA not able to get more military equipment to pursue the war? World War I had just ended, and surely Europe would have been awash with military equipment. Any thoughts?
Where's Derek? Derek, do you want me to answer to you?
I was going to mention Genoa, but yeah, that fantastic book of yours about the Hales brothers. I think you should do that one, Liz.
Okay, go on. Well, okay. You do have arms. There is contact being made across Europe to get arms. As Derek just mentioned, Genoa is one example. There were small shipments of arms coming in, but the biggest one, which is a massive ongoing in terms of the way the IRA handled it, was the Thompson submachine guns that were going to come in at the end of the war. They did get some of them through, but they, for some reason, put the whole consignment of 500 Thompsons together and left them on the dock. And that's where they were discovered and they were impounded. Now, they came over years later. So you did have arms coming through. You've got the Republican consuls and the contacts across Europe. The Hales brothers had their brother Donald, who was in Italy. Their sister Madge was going to and fro, and there was going to be a major shipment coming in from Italy, but for some reason that didn't happen. And in terms of arms that did get through, small guns and so on, you have the guys that were on the ships that were bringing in guns, but nothing of a massive effort apart from Thompson's, which they for some reason decided to ship them all together rather than actually send them in smaller packages.
Okay, Derek, do you want to add anything to that, or has she covered everything? Oh, Derek, you go on, sorry.
Yeah. Well, they also had British naval intelligence were also quite effective as well. I mean, the Genoa ship was massive. I mean, Mussolini and all, he was even involved in that. But British naval intelligence, they put a stop to that. But yeah, it had all sorts of logistical problems. You also had some hilarious problems. You actually had the IRA having to use interpreters in certain parts of like between Glasgow and Birmingham, Liverpool or whatever, or parts of East London where they just couldn't understand what each other was saying. But you also had financial problems. There was that infamous spat between Cathal Brugha and Michael Collins that involved Liam Mellows, who was the director of purchases at the time as well, where they were arguing over how the accounts were being handled. And that actually led to cash flow problems and to the ridiculous problem where, as I think it was Richard Mulcahy said it as well, that GHQ would be shot if you had volunteers in places like Tipperary who were being killed for lack of ammunition if they found out that part of the problem was because of administration and accounting processes because of disagreement between GHQ members.
Okay.
You had all sorts of reasons.
Okay. The next question is for Robert O'Keefe. If we can unmute Robert O'Keefe, is he here? Just give you a second there, Robert. It's okay if now see how you manage this question. What was the fate of the RIC men when they were captured in the attacks?
As far as I'm aware, the RIC men were disarmed and sent on their way. There certainly was they certainly weren't executed or anything. So I throw it open to the floor if there's any other conflicting views there.
Okay, maybe Stephen Ryan, if you want to come in with that, if that's right, give you a second to be unmuted. Hang on. Just let us know when you're in.
Yeah, I'm in. In Drangan and Rearcross and Hollyford, they weren't captured. And again in Barracks, they weren't captured in that the purpose of the attacks was to attack and render the barracks useless, to actually impose damage on the barracks. Now, in Barracks, there was the hope from Sean Gaynor that they would actually attack the barracks and that they would manage to flush out the RIC men, but it happened to be cancelled early, and this was again led to a problem between Frank McGrath and Sean Gaynor. In Rearcross, it went on until morning. It was very well fortified. The burning went on until morning, and eventually a scout had cancelled or had called for it to be abandoned because he mistook a funeral as being reinforcements coming to support Barracks. So it wasn't so much an issue in these particular ones. However, in Barracks, there was on the way to attack the barracks, a number of burglars were foiled, and these burglars were arrested and held. And incidentally, in Barracks, they became very useful as time went on because they were able to supply information with regards to where a lorry could be ascertained to move, a truck could be ascertained to move injured volunteers, and one of them was able to drive the truck. So the burglars became very useful in moving out of there. But that was a case of people being arrested on the way to the attack rather than RIC people being captured.
Okay. Well, I think what we're going to do is we're going to wrap it up now. I'm going to pass you on to Niamh Hassett in a second, but before I do, I just want to say this. I think what Tipperary and Liam O'Sullivan and Niamh Hassett have done in the background, and everybody involved with this project tonight, have done a fantastic job. You can see from the responses, we have people from all over the world that are feeling like, they want to connect. And I think this is a brilliant way of people connecting and remembering something that we all have in common. And if there is any other county who wants to remember their War of Independence event that was scheduled and is maybe cancelled for this year, contact us. We can get this set up, And I'll tell you one thing, when they come to remember the 200th anniversary of the burning of the barracks, you'll want to up your game, lads. Okay? So I would like to, first of all, thank you all for coming. If you do want to have a look at the documentary afterwards, if you feel all riled up after it, 1920 Burning of the Barracks will be posting on the Camorra Facebook page, the East Rising Stories Facebook page, and also the Tras na Tíre Facebook page. And it has got the great John Hassett, whose daughter is now going to see us out tonight. So from me, thank you very much. Niamh, all over to you.
Thank you, Marcus. Good evening, everyone. I just want to take a couple of minutes to say thank you to everybody involved in tonight's commemoration. Firstly, a huge thank you to Liam O'Sullivan and the team at Tras na Tíre for hosting tonight for us. Without you, we would not have been able to do this. In addition, you have brought something so positive to so many people's lives and given history lovers a chance to meet up despite the lockdown with the weeknight lecture series, called Míle Maith. I'd like to thank Kathleen, Stephen, Jerry, the two Michaels, Eamon, and the rest of the committee of Commemoration and Nóglac for the planning and the work they did for the original weekend of events in Hollyford, Drangan and Rearcross. A global pandemic did get in the way, but look, you know, he showed the world that despite lockdown, we can still gather and remember our heroes. To all the performers and the historians, Mila Buikas, you were absolutely brilliant. I was riveted to every moment. Everyone was meant to be here in person for the weekend, and we had much longer talks planned over the course of a whole weekend. But you all came here tonight in a, you know, using a very different format, because I suppose we all just wanted to remember and honour the brave men and women of 1920. Marcus, Howard, you did such a terrific job keeping the event moving along, and I want to thank you for all the work you did to prepare for tonight's talk. Your dedication to telling the story of our fight for freedom is truly inspirational, and you are building a monument to our heroes from history by telling their stories in film. It is a mixed evening of emotions for me. I suppose I would like to acknowledge three great friends who did so much to honour Tipperary's story through the years. Rémy Shanahan and his great friend, my dad, John Hassett. They both passed away last year. I think the third man is here tonight, that's Pat O'Donnell, and between them, these three men captured on film interviews with the surviving Tipperary volunteers in the 80s. In doing so, I suppose, well, they have preserved for us the accounts of a time now lost to living memory. Mark has used many of these interviews in his wonderful film that he's just spoken about, 1920, The Burning of the Barracks. And I suppose he himself is continuing the same work. We were actually going to screen that film tonight, but we realised then this commemoration was actually going to go on longer than any of the barrack attacks. So instead, tomorrow, as Mark said, we're all going to share the link. I've put it into the chat. So hopefully you'll be able to watch the fabulous film at your leisure. It's actually a brilliant account of the events we remember this evening, and well worth a watch. I'd like to thank each of you who tuned in this evening. Ye have been part of history as well as we gather to remember and honour Ireland's struggle for freedom. Gurv Mila Mahagwib Galer. And lastly, I want to offer thanks to the dead heroes who came out in the wind and the rain and the bitter cold. I suppose the Irish summer of the summer isn't what it used to be. It was a bad summer that year, and they brought the fight to the heart of British rule, and they removed the RIC from vast swathes of rural Tipperary and rural Ireland. Gwyniana dia trocra era nanamaka, agus I measc le crin an hwyl gorib siad. Iha a carda is gomermid bioga lair ag an am seo rish. Slán go fóil.
Okay, just one thing, folks. We're going to try something out. This is usually madness, but we're going to do this anyway. We will be, just in 1 second, don't do it yet, Liam. We're going to unmute everybody, but just one thing that I would say is that if it wasn't for somebody like John Hassett, you know, so much of this history would be lost. And I think he'd be really proud of an event like this, and really proud that his daughters were involved in this too. So thank you very much. And if you want to unmute everybody, we'll try a round of applause. 200, everybody. Thank you.
It's a great.
Oh, Marcus, well done. Well done, Dave. Super evening. Congratulations.
No, it's a house party. A house party.
Well done, Marcus. Well done, guys.
Very good. Very good.
I'll wake you up.
The camera could have been that out.
Well done, Michael.
Big tower.
nothing to do with
The actual further adventures starring Matt Damon as Jason Bourne over on TV.